MidDays presents the Extra Mile Podcast.
Welcome into another edition of the Extra Mile Podcast presented by the Mississippi Department of Transportation. I'm Paul Catul, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Will Kraft. Hey, we're out of the regular session, so we figured we'd have a little fun. And we really have a fascinating guest on today, and someone who could probably be on for a variety of different reasons. You might know him as the host of MidDays with Gerard Gibert. Gerard Gibert, of course, and he hosts kind of a political policy show, and he has a really interesting background too. So Gerard, thank you so much for coming in and speaking with us today.
Hey, Paul. Yeah, man. Thanks for having me, Paul. Well, good to be with you guys. I've listened to some of your shows, and they're really well done. And I think this is a good job and a good idea, really, to communicate with different people and bring them into the belly of the Department of Transportation. That's here, right. and promote that and share that with the people of the state of Mississippi. Every single person in the state of Mississippi touches what this department does.
Yep. That is absolutely true, and we'll clip that soundbite. Thank you for the ringing endorsement. So, Gerard, I've actually known you probably for decades now, which is kind of – so you co-founded a company, Venture Technologies, with my uncle, actually.
That's right.
So can you kind of talk about your background and how that all came to be?
Yeah, I sure did, with your uncle, Norman, and that actually occurred in 1986. So after graduating from Ole Miss, my degree is in accounting. I have a minor in economics, and the traditional career path for someone that graduates with a degree in accounting is to go work for a public accounting firm and practice public accounting, audit and tax type work, which I certainly was capable of doing, but it didn't excite me, honestly. I didn't really feel too pumped up about that as a career. I have deep respect for those people. They're brilliant. Their work ethic is incredible, a lot of long hours, and what they provide is extremely valuable. But I graduated from college in 1980, so there was no personal computer in 1980. Hard to believe, but in 1981 there was. That's when IBM introduced the personal computer. And as you can imagine, there was limited number of application software tools that were available for these new systems. And it started out kind of as a tool for accountants, honestly, because spreadsheets, right, were kind of the rage in those days. Wow, look at this electronic spreadsheet, something we all take for granted today. And there were some other tools that were made available for accountants. And so what I witnessed working for the firm of Arthur Andersen, I like to say before they started shredding documents, was when I worked for them. I worked in the consulting division, and they were unique in that of the big 8 accounting firms at the time. There are only 4 now. There's been lots of consolidation. They were the only firm that would hire someone straight out of college into that division because it was a unique practice relative to the other public accounting firms. Its focus was on information technology and creating these systems mainly on very large compute platforms, mainframes, IBM mid-range systems as well, that you couldn't buy off the shelf. You didn't buy, for example, public employees retirement system off the shelf, and there were no companies in that business. So you've probably heard in the news a lot with the Doge team, which has kind of inserted itself throughout the halls of the federal government. You've heard them talk about the really old aging software, particularly that being used by the IRS, for example. Well, I actually worked with the people who developed that system. That's how long that's been around, because it was Andersen that did that. They were the only people that would take on like the impossible projects that nobody. They were the only one that had the skills and the methodologies to take a project like that. You can imagine automating the IRS long before we had all these sophisticated tools and research capability we have today and information at your fingertips. It was in books, it's where you had to get it from. So it's like, well, there, the IRS code, go automate that, so thousands of pages of statutes. So that intrigued me. And I said, you know what, this personal computer. So I was watching these things pop up all across the offices of the firm I worked for, Arthur Andersen, yet in my division, which was which was focused on and virtually dedicated on information technology, we kind of scoffed at those and thought, those are just toys. You can't do anything serious with that. And because none of us did any work, no client was going to pay us to develop, spreadsheets for them or anything, and you couldn't run any serious application software. So we were still working with these centralized type computing platforms. But it just occurred to me, that this isn't going to stop here. This machine is going to transform the world. And I think if you look back 40 years later, we can pretty much say that it transformed the world. Just the idea of a microprocessor. And you see how that's evolved. But and the other thing that was sort of pivotal about the personal computer, and I know that this is really going back a long time, it's 1981, was that it represented the first time that an organization, I won't say a consumer because there was absolutely no consumer need to have a personal computer the way there is today, of course. Right. Wasn't anything you could do with it that would benefit a consumer. But it was the first time an organization could acquire information technology, hardware, software, without going through the direct producer of those products. If you wanted an IBM system back in the early days, you had to go to IBM and buy it. You don't buy mainframes from dealers, if you will. Right, there was no channel, was no third party in the supply chain. But the personal computer, when IBM decided, you know what, we're going to authorize dealers and we're going to let them represent IBM, provided they meet all the various criteria. And we're going to sell these things that way because we can't afford for our high-octane, highly compensated IBM reps to be running around selling these $7,000 and $8,000 computers, which is what they called back then. We need them selling multi-$10 million mainframes. By the way, back in those days, the operating system for an IBM mainframe, some of their high-end models, you couldn't purchase. You had to pay on a subscription basis, which is what we're all accustomed to today. Yeah. IBM was doing that in the 70s, and it was $25,000, $30,000 a month just to use the operating system. Wow. Even back then. So that kind of piqued my interest, and then we started to see this whole new industry pop up. It was dealers of these personal computers to work with small, mid-sized businesses, departments within large businesses, where the big IT departments of even large enterprises would set standards up but allow the departments to procure these desktop systems and use them on a departmental basis and even connect to their mainframe. Well, that's what got my interest, and I said, I think I want to play in that industry. And I was kind of a geeky guy back then. I wrote lots of software, but I also understood accounting, so I could speak the language to the technical people on one side and the business people on the other side. And I've subscribed to lots of journals and other sources that kind of help with that. There was a magazine back then called Byte, B-Y-T-E, Byte magazine. Because you remember, we didn't have internet back then, so right. You didn't have any sort of digital information. You had to get the book, the hard copy magazine. And this company, MicroAge, was recruiting franchisees. IBM said, we only want to authorize people that to sell our personal computers that have a relationship and affiliation with one of the large franchises. And there was about 5 of them, Computerland. A lot of people remember them. It was a company called Entree. Both of those companies had outlets here, had franchisees here. Connecting Point, 2 or 3 others. But I caught an ad one day from a company called MicroAge, and they were based in Phoenix, in Tempe, actually, not far from Arizona State. And they looked different. They were recruiting people that really kind of suited my background and my skill set. They were looking for business people that didn't just want to, we used to call it push boxes, just sell to corporations, boxes of computers, but implement systems and provide consulting services around that, value-added services, as we called it. And then in those days, it was, so we signed up to become a franchisee. Now, your uncle will tell you that was a very stressful period. We spent about 14 months trying to raise money for that endeavor. $189,000 is what we determined we needed through a business plan that we cobbled together on a compact luggable, which back then cost about $10,000. So I had to borrow money from my parents to do that and finance it. So But we put that together, went to a local financial institution, and thinking, I'm 27 years old. Of course, I know everything. I'm infallible, as you think you are when you're 27. And surely they're going to just write this check to me and see what kind of amazing opportunity this is. And I was, of course, dead wrong. I didn't have something that is known as collateral. I didn't really understand that at the time. But I kept at it, and then my wife came to me one night and said, we've been married about 4 years, I guess, at the time. She said, I've been keeping my parents, that'd be my in-laws, abreast of your progress or lack thereof, and I think you need something. What's it called? I said, you mean collateral? She said, yeah. She said, well, my parents have some land. She's from the coast. That is on one of the exits on I-10 that was, back in those days, just desolate. There was nothing back there. And they said they're willing to make that available to you as collateral if that would help. And, of course, I foolishly exclaimed in our little kitchen, of course that would help, And you're thinking about at that point, you just want to get this deal done. I mean, I had such belief in this and the future of the industry, which turned out to be the right hunch, that I was willing to take the risk that, I'm going to put my in-laws' life savings. They were a very moderate means. My mother-in-law was an accountant at Keesler Air Force Base. My father-in-law sold cars at D Chevrolet. So, but it was common back then for couples to invest in land as a way to kind of secure their retirement. So I took their life savings as they were approaching retirement, and I went back to the bank and I put that deed on the table and said, will that work? And, of course, their eyes got about that big, and they said, yeah. Off to the races we went, and of course that was your Uncle Norman and I that started that through that endeavor. But it was extremely stressful. I actually have one banker tell me people have all the computers they're ever going to need, and that was 1985. So just lacked the vision, So fast forward from there, we scaled the business through the evolution of the industry from the original days of just local area networking where things were accustomed to easily today. We just connect computers together. That was actually a pretty big deal. That was a pretty hard exercise, pretty difficult challenge just to get all these things to talk to each other. That's, again, common today. So we did that, and through the introduction of the commercial internet and really the mid-'90s is when that took hold, and then the Y2K era. I spent about 2.5 years at the New Jersey Department of Corrections, helping them, overseeing a project actually that my company provided as a prime contractor to remediate their Y2K problem. So I travel between here and beautiful downtown Trenton, New Jersey, every week for about 30 months to pull that off. And that was a hard deadline. It's not like, well, we missed our date here. There was a hard date. And the contingency plan that the state of New Jersey had adopted and documented was that the National Guard would be deployed and mobilized to take over all the correctional institutions, all 16 of them, should that happen, with about 55,000 incarcerated.
Sure.
That wouldn't be a fun exercise, as you can imagine. And then just fast forward from there. After that, the kind of took a breather, but we could see that business was almost too easy during that period because everybody had to spend money to upgrade their systems to avoid Y2K catastrophe. And I know a lot of people think that was a hoax. I'm here to tell you it was not. I personally wrote lots of code that only had 2-digit year in the date. In the case of New Jersey, they were running aging IBM mid-range systems, all of which were 2-digit year date in the operating system as well as the application software. So that was a legitimate deal, but it's a credit to our industry, the IT industry. People just work tirelessly and love challenges and love conquering those challenges. So we got that done. We came out of that and we realized that, that was too easy and people are going to take a rest, these big enterprises. We spent all this money fixing this problem. And that's when we came up with the idea of, we need recurring revenue. That's common today, and that is.
We've heard that term once or twice.
Yeah, that's a hot button. Certainly on Wall Street as well. They love it. And if you look at all the big major technology companies today, of how many of them have transitioned to subscription-based revenue, almost all of us on the planet have some sort of subscription
No
to
doubt.
one or more. And that's where it came from. And so we got together as a team, and we decided, well, let's build a data center. And you got to remember, this was 2000. This was right after the Y2K situation, and we made the decision to invest really small, to kind of just experiment with it almost. But we still built a little data center out in Ridgeland by our headquarters that would have all the components that a modern data center would have in it, with backup power and HVAC and fire suppression, security, all the what you could do, physical and cybersecurity. But we were just experimenting. Then I get a call one day out of the blue from Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hosemann. He was at the time, he was not in politics. He was the lawyer for the Jackson State University Foundation. So he said, Gerard, and if you know the Lieutenant Governor, you can appreciate this. He said, Gerard, I'm working with the Jackson State University Foundation. They got their eyes set on this building in Southwest Jackson that used to be occupied by the Allstate Corporation. They built it in the 1970s, 1978 to be exact, to house their regional call center. And during its heyday, they had 1,200 contact center agents. Wow. And the entire building is built with raised floor to run all the big telephone cables of that day, twisted pair copper back in those days in a rubber sheath, a vinyl sheath. And so he said, look, they want to get this building, Jackson State University does, and they want to turn it into a high-tech facility. They want to anchor it with a data center. I understand you've got one. I don't know exactly what that is. I said, well, yes, sir, I do. But we just built it, and we're experimenting. We don't have even enough revenue to cover our costs. We're just going to see how this goes. I said, well, how much square footage you want me to take? And he said, well, I need you to take 12,000. Wow. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot by today's data center standards, but I'm doing in my head about what it costs to equip that, with all the IT infrastructure. Well, that's tens of millions of dollars to do that. Even a 12,000 square foot data center, when you consider that typical, say, 250,000 square foot data center building is usually going to be a $2 billion investment. So, and so I kind of went blank for a minute. He said, well, Gerard, don't make a decision today. Think about this. I said, well, after I told him, man, that's just a tall order for us. And I called him back a couple of days later. I said, Jackson State has always been a great customer of ours. We have a great working relationship with their IT and their administration. I tell you what, if we could get them to subscribe to a complement of services delivered by the data center that would just cover my rent, I'll do it. And we got together, and they agreed, and that's how we ended up moving the data center out there. And it's still in operation today. At the time that the company was sold, we actually had about 55,000 end-user customers that were all over the world, actually, that we serviced in that respect. So Auditor Phil Bryant delivered the keynote address at our grand opening, our opening ceremonies for that data center facility. So we had figured out a way from a technical perspective to provision cloud services before the term was invented.
That's awesome.
When Jeff Bezos of Amazon was still playing around with books and hadn't thought about being in the data center business, nor had Microsoft or Oracle or IBM or Google or any of those major players in that world, we were actually in the cloud services business. That's
incredible.
Yeah.
Well, one thing you mentioned, sort of interfacing with several of what now we know, big-time politicians, folks that we recognize, former governor, current lieutenant governor. Was some of those interactions what sort of brought you into the political sphere, or did you always have those interests?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so just briefly fast forward from that, we did pretty well. I felt like the company had gotten to the point where, we've kind of hit our threshold. It's hard to expand companies in our industry because it's such a high-touch customer scenario.
Sure.
That if you want to go launch in a new market, you're going to have to displace people that are already there that are doing quite well. It's not like you're offering anything unique. And so it made sense to me that, to scale this company, we're going to have to go acquire a company. So I went to Wall Street and started pitching the idea of that. And it was 2008, and I got turned down again and told, your company's worth nothing. which was very disappointing. But I met one person that said, I like your story. Here's what you need to do. You know what he said? You need to keep growing your subscription recurring revenue. You got a much more palatable asset for investment or even financing through debt. And so came back to him 4 years later. I said, I think we may be there. He looked at our financials. He said, yeah, let's go. And we went back. And this time, everybody that said no before said yes from a private equity perspective. And so we took on some capital, acquired some companies. We did pretty well. We quadrupled our bottom line in the span of about 3 years from the organic production of each of the individual companies. That was the vision I had, that there would be plenty of synergy to capitalize on, and so we did real well and put the company up for sale, and then ultimately that occurred in 2019.
Okay.
And January 2019. It was to your question, it was 2008 when I first got interested in politics. I'll be perfectly honest. I don't know that I could tell you who my rep or senator was, and I don't think I was unlike a lot of other people even today, talking about it at a statewide level. I always felt like, they're there, I'm here, just leave me alone. I'll leave you alone, and I'll keep running my business and producing value for society. And then I came across this ad one day during the 2008 presidential campaign, and it was candidate Barack Obama talking about his plans for health care reform, and he mentioned something that really got my interest called shared responsibility. And that shared responsibility sounded like that was something he was expecting to impose on employers. And as an employer, I got nervous about that. So I started digging into it and found out, wow, this could cost us significant money. As best I could, try to take what the plans were in sort of bullet point form and relate that financially, mathematically. So I called my lawyer at the time, our HR lawyer, and I started running it by him. And one of the things his plan called for was that an employer would have to provide affordable coverage, whether it's for the individual spouse, or the family. And that gets complicated because, well, if I have someone working for me who has a spouse working for somewhere else, are we supposed to split this? Because we both have the same requirement. So I called my lawyer and ran that by him and said, wait, Gerard, first this guy's got to get elected. Second, the law's got to pass. Bill's got to pass into law. It's got to be codified. The Supreme Court is going to strike it down, or it's going to be challenged at least. And I said, well, my personal opinion is every one of those things is going to happen. Yeah. And that's what happened. I said, it's going to be permanent, and we're going to have to deal with it, manage it. And that's how I got involved in politics, honestly. I want you to know that scenario I picked up on and described before anybody ever thought about health care reform in 2008, that has, since the law was passed, it came up that, this doesn't really work. That's referred to as the family glitch.
Oh, wow.
It still has not been codified to this day. 15 years later, there are what are called safe harbor rules for the employers because they couldn't figure out, this is crazy. Every employer would have to find out if their spouse works or even if they have outside income. I'd have to find out what their income is because it's based on household income, which could exceed or extend beyond just the pay for working for the wages working for the company. They could have other work, investment income, et cetera. But that actually is how I got involved in politics. And after that, I started reading and consuming everything I could, particularly on healthcare reform, because I could see this was going to be a huge part of our government. Look, today, it's a huge part of our government.
No doubt about it.
It's the biggest part of our government when you count Medicare, Medicaid, TRICARE, and everything combined. Government, even in the state of Mississippi, our Medicaid program is larger than the general fund budget. It's about 5 times larger than the Department of Transportation's budget. We're effectively in the healthcare insurance business at government at all levels, and I didn't see that back in 2008, but since then, that's pretty clear. That's where we are. That's how I got involved in politics. Yeah.
Continues to balloon. No regrets though. You sticking with it, staying in it. You've enjoyed. I know sort of maybe the taking on the host role on the show is kind of the first official foray, maybe into the political sphere.
Other than being invited on as a guest on on SuperTalk, that actually started because after I contacted my lawyer about how are we going to manage all these nuances and complicated policy with respect to my responsibility as an employer, he determined that I had done a lot of research on this subject, and I understood it pretty well. And so he invited me to participate in a panel discussion at the Ole Miss Law School, and along with 3 other people, the commissioner of insurance, you can imagine why they would be involved, the head of the Mississippi Medical Association, and the hospital administrator, CEO for what at the time was the largest hospital in the state, and that was North Mississippi Medical Center. It was moderated by Andy Taggart, who most people know from his political background. This was in front of the law school and the faculty and the administration. This was in 2009, before the bill was passed in 2010. And when he first called me, he said, wait, I'm an IT guy. You know, what do you invite me to this thing for? He says, well, you appear to have taken an interest in this, and I think your knowledge would be valuable. And honestly, I learned, in no disrespect to my panelists there, but they had kind of dismissed it. You know, I don't think it's going to pass, or I don't think the Supreme Court is going to uphold it. Therefore, I'm not going to worry about it. Mm-hmm. I did. I felt like, yeah, you can see the way this is all lining up. And so I read and analyzed and consumed everything I could get my hands on. And I came away thinking, gosh, I know more than they do about this, and they're the ones that really need to know about it. But they just weren't convinced anything was going to happen. I was, and I sort of got ahead of it. And so after that, somebody found out, and I got contacted about writing some articles about it. And I did, and those got published in the Madison County Journal. A couple got published in the Clarion Ledger as well. But I wrote a series of articles where I get into the details. Well, that gets noticed by the schedulers at SuperTalk, and they call me and say, hey, look, why don't you come on? It was with Mr. Gallo, the late, great Paul Gallo, first appearance ever. And that was also 2010 time frame, before the bill passed, as a guest to talk about health care. And I primarily focused on what this means to employers as an employer. And then I got invited to present healthcare reform to numerous HR groups. I presented to the Society of CPAs. I was a panelist with the Cato Institute, to the Federalist Society. It just kind of blossomed from there. And after my appearance on SuperTalk, I was invited back, to participate as a guest numerous times after that to talk about various topics, healthcare, business, economic policy. That's kind of my passion. And then it was in 2020. And that is when J.T. Williamson, the host of the J.T. show at SuperTalk, had become ill and unable to fulfill his duties as the host of that show. And I ran into SuperTalk management at a restaurant, local restaurant. And just stopped to say hello. I know them, stopped to say hello. And they said, look, you're familiar with what's going on with JT? I said, I am. They said, you've always been a good guest. Why don't you come on, try your hand at guest hosting? I said, well, okay, sure. So I came on, for a day, and it went to 2 days. And then finally in January of 21, he called me and said, hey, look, would you be interested in doing this full time? And I said, oh, sure, why not? So that's how I got involved in the radio hosting business. And, of course, since that, I guess, involvement and attention paid to the healthcare reform debacle, which I wrote a lot about. I actually have like a really boring 75-slide PowerPoint on the Affordable Care Act. It bores people, except people have to deal with it.
Sure, yeah.
So, but I did it more for educational purpose because it is big and it is deep and it is complex. But, that kind of piqued my interest in other aspects of public policy. Sure. And I guess the rest is history, so they say. I kind of like to focus on healthcare policy and economic tax policy, both at the federal and the state level. Fiscal policy, that's sure. Kind of my passion and what I understand, the best as well. So that's how we got here.
It's absolutely fascinating to see you go from businessman to talk show radio host. That's a really, really cool story, and it doesn't even really stop there because I guess it was maybe not last week, but the week before, you were actually invited to the White House to do a Radio Row event and interview some big time people in the President Trump's administration. Can you kind of talk about how that was?
I can. That was really interesting, and there's kind of I think a rather fascinating story of how that came about, and it was at the RNC this past year in Milwaukee. I was selected by the governor to be a delegate, honored to be so on behalf of the great state of Mississippi. And I received a call while I was there from the CEO of Newsmax. I don't know how he found me or really what his thoughts were when he introduced himself. And he said, look, we want you to appear as a guest while you're there at the RNC. We have our booth set up at the Fiserv Arena, and there was also another facility a couple miles away that was on I can't remember the name, a small college that's kind of in the heart of Milwaukee. And they had turned an auditorium that they'd moved all the seats out of, and it was just filled with all these media outlets, podcasters, radio. Well, Newsmax had one there too, so for their streaming platform. So I did one there and one live from the RNC at Fiserv. And they said, hey, look, that was great. We're gonna call you back and have you on some more. I said, sure. So I didn't hear anything, for 8 months. So I guess I didn't pass the grade, didn't make it. And then about 6 weeks ago, I get contacted by 3 different Newsmax schedulers within 24 hours to do what they call hits, be on their shows. And it just popped up out of nowhere. Well, one of those was 2 Fridays ago, Good Friday, 10:35. We were off. The show was the best of that day. And I do my Newsmax interviews in the SuperTalk studio because that's how I'm branded as the host of MidDays SuperTalk Mississippi. So I'm in the studio where I normally do the show. Nobody's there. Place is kind of dark except the lights I turned on in the studio. And it's, 15-minute panel discussion that particular day. An hour later, I get a text from a person who identifies themselves as the White House Media Affairs Director, extending an invitation to this Radio Row event. Now, this was Good Friday. The Radio Row event was April 22nd, Tuesday, 4 days later. Yeah. And, by the way, we got to know by 5 o'clock Eastern, 4 o'clock Central, our time, today, if you're interested, we got a spot for you. And so I sent it to, first thing I thought was, this is a scam.
Right.
This is not real. I sent it to Congressman Michael Guest and said, can you just look into this? And he came back and said, well, this is the right person. I said, well, I figured that out. I get the name, and I looked that up, And then I did a reverse lookup on the phone number, and the initials, aligned with the name that she provided to me. So I just picked up the phone and called her. I said, I hope I'm not insulting you, but I was just curious. Are you really who you are? Is this real? She laughed. She said, well, you can look me up and tell. I said, well, I did that, but how do I know? So she said, I'm going to send you the form that you need to fill out for Secret Service. You and one other person are invited. That's the way we do it with the radio outlets. But I need it by 4 o'clock today, so I had to call the SuperTalk team and a couple of conference calls to see, can we pull this off? And we figured it out, and so we got it back about 15 minutes in time. And she sent me a text. She said, okay, I have everything. You should be good to go. I'm going to Good Friday service. I'll send you some more info tonight or tomorrow. Well, I was still skeptical, honestly. Sure. And we did the form, and it all looked legitimate. And the email address, it looked like authentic. And so I felt like, okay, maybe so. But didn't hear anything that night. About noon the next day, still hadn't heard anything. And I'm kind of stressed, like, man, what if we're being duped? We fly to Washington, we show up at the White House, and there's nobody here for us. What are you doing here? So, but I texted her. She said, yeah, it's coming. And about 2 hours later, she sent me additional information. You could tell this is legitimate. So we headed up there, made a day trip out of it. We actually broadcast the show live. Now, our show was 3 hours, 10 to 1, and this event was Eastern 10 to 1. Mm-hmm. So we still had another hour. We got permission from them to stay on and continue our show live. We were the only one. There were 10 in our group. There was another day that had another 10. They were all national outlets but us. But at the end of our event, you can't just, as you can imagine, walk around the White House grounds there. You have to be escorted. So her deputy escorted us. And we're walking out, and I had already learned from her, the White House Media Affairs Director. I asked her, how'd you find me? She said, we saw you on Newsmax. And we called our Newsmax contacts to get your phone number. Well, I kind of felt like that might be the case,
Sure.
you know, otherwise they probably wouldn't know. And the deputy who escorted us out, he said, by the way, it was me that saw you on Newsmax, and I told the boss there, we need to get this guy on. So that's how that happened. And each of us had 3 people to interview. I had the White House Deputy Communications Director, the White House Deputy Press Secretary, and also the Deputy National Security Advisor. And they were all fun to interview. Now, there were cabinet secretaries there as well.
Sure.
I think because we were a late entrant, unfortunately, we didn't get one. I really wanted to interview Scott Bessent. He's the head of the Council of Economic Advisors, because that's, again, just kind of the subject matter that I enjoy and have the most proficiency with. And but we were so tight in this room with these U-shaped tables in this conference room in the Eisenhower building, which is adjacent to the West Wing there. At one point, let's see, what's her name? I'm drawing a blank here. The White House press secretary.
Oh, God.
Yeah,
Names
I
I'm
know
not
exactly
gonna
who
But
you're
she was on my left, and Scott Bessent was on my right, and they were about four feet away. So Caroline Levitt, by the way.
Use the
So,
microphone
yeah.
out there.
Levitt.
You might get
Yeah,
out there.
but it was just kind of surreal. Like, I'm sitting at this table, and they were as close as you guys are to me right now, with Caroline Levitt and Scott Bessent. And in the back, so I'm taking a picture, you know. So in the background, it's Secretary Kristi Noem and Secretary Doug Collins of Veterans Affairs. They're like 4 feet away, standing up, talking to each other. So I got all of them in one photo, believe it or not.
That's pretty
So
cool.
Wow.
That was pretty neat. And the cool thing is, the communications director said, "Hey, you'll definitely be back." He said that when I interviewed him, and I'm not sure what precipitated that, other than I hope they liked our work. You know, and that was the main thing.
They're gonna do
So-
like Newsmax. They're gonna no 12 months, and then you're gonna hear from them. Can you be here tomorrow?
Well, that'd be fun. But that is, you know, just thinking about the awesome power that you're within when you're there on the White House grounds. That's my first time to be on that side of the fence. I, by the way, was the only person of the 10 outlets that hadn't been in some way involved in the past, because they've been doing this. They're all veterans. I was the rookie, you know. They're all veterans in the broadcasting industry, and specifically the radio industry. But I got to know them as well, and they were all cool people. But Bryn Jeffers is her name. She's the White House Media Affairs Director. She was there coordinating everything. She was excellent. She was awesome. All very competent people, all a joy to talk to, all very respectful, and
Sure.
and it made you feel good about being an American, honestly, you know, to be in the heart of all this. So I'm super proud and honored and privileged and humbled to be included. And when we launched our show, it being the only one that was live, of course, at the time that our show went live, and I've got to introduce it as I do every morning with sort of my same intro to kick us off, there were no interviews going on. So as soon as I did that, all the faces and eyes were on me, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm being judged by all these consummate
First to the
broadcasting professionals, and what are they thinking, you know, listening to me do my deal here. So, but man, it was a lot of fun. That was cool.
Cool.
It was
Very cool.
absolutely. I certainly agree. I was going to say, you know, I think a lot of things you've mentioned here show sort of using foresight and thinking and analyzing patterns and seeing what's sort of coming. In a lot of that mindset, did you ever think, all right, to get this auditing degree, or this accounting degree, I'm gonna really take a liking to healthcare, and then I'm gonna go into radio journalism?
Never in a million years. I will say this. Being in the IT business, you know, we used to have a hashtag that we incorporated in just our culture, and it's called Embrace Change. We are change agents. We accept that. Sure. And people are resistant to change. And I used to tell our clients, you know, you're going to hate me in this for a while. Most people do. You've been through IT conversions before. They're painful. But then I promise, in a few months from now, you'll say, how do we live without this? I mean, I see it over and over, and I've seen it in my career. But being in the IT industry and having to keep up with the rapid pace of change, the pace of change and the cycle times in the IT industry already were extremely tight long before we ever got to the level of sophistication and how broad it is today. So if you think about, for example, vehicles, they got to deal with that once a year, right, in general.
Right.
So in our world, it's like, man, there's an announcement, something brand new today. And then you got to go figure out, do we play there? Do we not? You master that. So I've always had this voracious appetite to consume information. And so sort of transitioning and converting that to politics and public policy wasn't that hard. I come in prepared, honestly, with a whole lot more topics and data than I can ever get to on a show. That's just kind of my nature. I subscribe to a dozen or so newspapers. I may have the only subscription in the whole state to the Boston Globe, for example. So, but I find it necessary to keep up with how people across the country think and how that might affect us here in Mississippi, and it certainly affects the national landscape. I still subscribe to a number of the old IT journals because I just enjoy keeping up. And a lot of that, honestly, if you think about it today, that factors into our lives.
Oh, absolutely.
Our public policy. I mean, heck, there's not a day that goes by we're not talking about how do we regulate this artificial intelligence thing, for example, and cybersecurity, which is a major deal that affects all of us, that we got to be, just as this organization does. So that wasn't a hard transition. I still like to just consume lots of information and like to be proficient with it. Yeah.
It's certainly paid off for you. Let's pivot to a little bit of transportation. So we usually ask, legislators, other elected officials, kind of a big picture question about why it's important to have a strong, efficient transportation network. You're a former business owner. You had to move goods and services and that sort of thing. And, we were talking beforehand, and you kind of have an example of this already kind of in mind with the AWS project in Madison County. So can you kind of give us your thoughts on why it's important to have that transportation system that's really clicking on all cylinders?
I can, and I'm going to start by sharing just a little bit of an anecdotal, maybe it's an anecdote, is when I was assigned to a project when I was with Anderson in California. I was actually in Southern California, just north of Bakersfield. This is when Ronald Reagan had just been elected, and at that time, what was the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, something you hear a lot about. That's where I was. That was the original Strategic Petroleum Reserve built in World War II as a way to harvest and store oil in the foothills in Southern California there, just for military purposes. That's since been moved to Louisiana. But one of the things I noticed right off the bat was the quality of the roads in California. Anybody's been in California, and what used to astonish me is like, wow, the sides of the roads here, the exits onto the freeways, they're like landscape better than, the gardens in the finest homes. And so is it any wonder that California is now, the fourth or fifth largest economy in the world? Now, we may not particularly in Mississippi care for their politics, but you can't deny that most of all this technology we use today, that's where it came from. And I believe that their infrastructure played a role in that. Now, I'm not saying we need to overdo it and go landscape every exit on the interstate, but we do pretty good here. That would be an expense we wouldn't want to bear. But we're sort of now, I think, catching up to where they were already thinking about 40 years ago. And I do think that was a driver of economic growth. You mentioned, Paul, the AWS project. If anybody's been out there in Madison County, I am honored to be involved in that as a member of the Madison County Economic Development Authority, and been on that board now since 2018. So saw this thing coming and was involved in it back in 2019 before anybody else knew anything about it, including the governor at that time. So we didn't want to bother anybody until we got, we're looking like we may have a deal here. But there's an infrastructure component of that as well. And there's no doubt in dealing with a number of prospects for the mega site in Madison County, which is where the Amazon Fulfillment Center is located, currently operates. There are a couple other as a beverage distributorship out there as well. But now there's massive investment and build out of this AWS hyperscale campus. there's no doubt that transportation infrastructure plays a key role in attracting economic development. They pay close attention to that, especially when it involves, as you said, the movement of goods and services. That's a huge deal. The other thing is, you know where most of the fiber is in this country that extends and connects metropolitan areas? It's in the middle of the interstates. You see the orange sheaths coming up. You guys have seen that in the grounds between the two different directions on an interstate. That's people installing fiber is what that is. And so it's important that we have quality infrastructure and deliver a good experience to motorists. It also means that we're likely to have more usage, and when there's more usage, that means they're paying taxes because they're stopping and buying gas and helping us pay for all that infrastructure. So I think this agency has done a great job, and there's lots of improvements that could be pointed to that I think we will all benefit from. One that most of us have traveled from this part of the state is 49, of course, between here and the coast. And wow, every time I travel, I'd say, what a massive improvement this is. That's very exciting. So there's $215 million of new infrastructure that will be constructed in Madison County to accommodate the AWS project. And that was done through a loan from the state that the county of Madison will pay off from the tax revenue it will receive. It's a no-brainer, obviously. So I think it's extremely important. I think that this department now, with some more money flowing into it by virtue of passing of the tax bill this past session, is going to allow MDOT to tap more federal money so that we can make even further improvements and extend and expand capacity as well as maintain existing infrastructure.
Absolutely.
Love that. Love to hear that.
Exactly what you just said, hopefully, and sort of addressing on the forefront these issues we're seeing. These data-driven things that we're already seeing with overcrowding and capacity issues, we can sort of address them on the front end and not after the fact. One thing you just absolutely mentioned, talking about some extra funding, that recurring revenue term we mentioned earlier, sort of transition a little bit. Largely all of the session work that MDOT is concerned with is complete, but we do need that appropriations bill still on the table. Yeah, that would certainly be helpful. But just thoughts on the session. We sort of, I think we know what we're expecting as far as our appropriations bill, but the special session as a whole, sort of hearing things that maybe other things could be on the table.
Yeah, it's hard to tell at this point. It's rumors.
Sure.
So we don't have anything concrete, definitive. That is 100% the purview of the governor, of course, to call the legislature back in to the Capitol for a special session. I happened to interview Senator Briggs Hobson today, and he, of course, is chair of Senate Appropriations. So he's within the top three that are involved. Yeah, and he didn't have any insight. He just said, we don't have a date yet, and he didn't really have any thoughts as to whether to expect any other issues would be brought up. I do think, just in observing Governor Tate Reeves, that if and it's not just him, but any of these governors, if they're going to call you back for a special session, if there's something that they want to put on the table, they're going to make sure, they're going to count the votes and make sure that it will pass before they bring it up and leave without some production there. I recall Governor Phil Bryant calling a special session in 2018 to establish the Mississippi Lottery Corporation. He had counted the votes and he knew that he could get that done. So I've been honored to serve since then on the lottery board, on the board of the Mississippi Lottery Corporation.
That was my first session as an MDOT employee. So that sticks out for me too. Yeah.
So that I don't know that we'll see anything. That what's been rumored is perhaps school choice. That's something that doesn't really have any traction in the Senate. Minimal, limited legislation in the House did pass, got sent to the Senate, didn't go anywhere. Maybe that'll come up. I still don't think it would pass, honestly. We got work to do in the Senate there. So, and I don't really know a date, but I know there are a lot of agencies that are stressed out about it right now.
Yeah, a lot of appropriation things on the table. I think, and the governor mentioned this in his comments, generally I think the only time he's called them is for an economic development
that's right.
issue. They made an announcement today. I think you talked about.
Yeah.
So may not even be an economic issue to bring up at this point. I feel like he's just throwing them out there left and right these days, doing everything we can, getting more economy, driving up.
He's been hyper focused on
Yeah.
that. I believe that's what the governor's primary responsibility is. Honestly, they should be the chief economic development officer of the state, and he recognizes that, and I applaud him for that. And Governor Phil Bryant was really good at that as well.
Sure.
Governor Haley Barbour. We've had a lot of success. I think they built the foundation. We've had a lot of success. This AWS deal is transformational, though. I mean, I don't think anybody ever expected that. And in their announcement, they sandbagged what that investment's going to be at $10 billion. That's kind of the official. But in discussions and just observations of the investments they're making, it's going to be considerably more than that, probably double to triple that.
Wow.
And it wouldn't shock me to see even more projects. AWS has been very pleased with their experience in the state of Mississippi, a tribute to the county, the state government, economic development, our regulatory environment, permitting framework, everything is very conducive to business investment expansion. So it's paying off for us right now. I personally think that project, maybe I'm biased a little bit because I've felt so strongly about how this could help our state. That will do more for our state long term than any bill we could ever pass in that capital across the street.
That's awesome.
That's what I think. And I think there's a lot more coming behind that, so which is good news.
We're for it.
Yeah.
Big fans around here.
We're big Mississippi fans, so anything, just keep it going.
All the roads.
Absolutely.
No doubt. So we got some fun questions for you, but one more. Me and Will, we, outside of work, we talk a lot about the just political happenings and that sort of thing. So there is, it's not tomorrow, but there is a major election cycle coming up in 2027. Some big offices that will need to be filled. What are you hearing any scuttlebutt on things that are happening?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of rumor, and there are some people who have actually shared with me directly, what their thoughts and plans are. The first thing I would say is, man, it sure seems awfully early, right? We're 2.5 years out,
right.
And you're starting to see kind of battle lines being drawn and people starting to get busy along those lines. But I think what makes this unique is that we have a governor and a lieutenant governor that are terming out at the same time. And we've got folks in other statewide offices that have aspirations as well,
Certainly.
even though those don't term out. But I think you'll likely see the Lieutenant Governor, Delbert Hosemann, raise his hand for governor. I think that's kind of a foregone conclusion. I think Attorney General Lynn Fitch will also be in that race at this point. Auditor Shad White, he's telling people that's what his interest is as well, to run for governor. Secretary of State Michael Watson is leaning heavy towards lieutenant governor. Of course, he served in the Senate for 12 years. He knows that pretty well. There's some other folks. Jeff Tate in the Senate, Joel Carter in the Senate have indicated an interest in Secretary of State, knowing that's going to be vacated by Secretary Michael Watson. Haven't heard much about Treasurer David McRae. I've heard rumors about him having an interest in a Washington post at this point.
Okay.
So not sure what the timing is, however, on that. And then, of course, if Auditor White moves into another race, you'll have a seat there. Daniel Sparks, Senator Daniel Sparks, I think, is expressed an interest perhaps of state auditor. You got former Representative Nick Bain, Treasurer, state auditor, has thought about that. And then you got Commissioner of Agriculture Andy Gibson. He, I think, is also ascending the political ranks. Will he run for something? Maybe it's lieutenant governor, maybe it's governor. Not really sure. Former Speaker of the House Philip Gunn.
I was about to ask.
I think there's an interest there. For governor for him. I don't know that he would have an interest in any other position. I know he's had interest in it before, and also he's had interest in U.S. Senate, but I don't think the timing of that worked out for him. Of course, business person Tom Duff of the Duff brothers, one of the wealthiest, or the wealthiest, he and his brother in the state. There's been rumors about him possibly throwing his hat in the ring for governor as well. Don't really know anything definitive at this point. Nobody that's made like a formal official announcement. But that's kind of the landscape, the way I see it. I've also heard the possibility of Congressman Trent Kelly jumping in the race for governor as well. I think he's expressed an interest in that. So I think I covered everybody at this point. That's a lot of people.
But that's
That was
it, though,
good.
right? There is a lot of people. Does seem
Could be
like
interesting.
Yeah. It seems like maybe more so than maybe the last couple of election cycles.
I think so, because you got people moving out of existing seats, and you got 2 seats, the top of the food chain there, terming out. So that anytime you have that and you don't have an incumbent, you're likely to get a large field. So it'll be interesting to see how all those various personalities, where they land, and how they'll differentiate themselves with the voters.
Time will tell. As you said, it is still a bit of a ways away, but I have no doubt, blink and it'll be here.
Yeah, that's
sure.
right.
Well, that's the knowledge drop I was looking for. Going to go back and listen to that again. That's awesome. So, yeah, we covered a lot of ground, a lot of great information. We like to end it with a couple of fun questions.
Yeah.
Will, let's let you hit the first one, sir.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we, as a podcast, Mississippians, people at MDOT, we like to eat. We like food. Yeah. We like good food. Anytime we're on the road with the podcast, we try and find somewhere different to go eat. But one thing we love to ask our guests is if there's a spot, lots of times we do have elected officials, and they're very hesitant to sort of give a specific spot, especially inside the district. Maybe we can get one outside, but for you, I would say maybe just if there's somewhere that you go extremely regularly, absolutely let us know. But maybe a hole in the wall or something that you love but you don't get to go to often.
Yeah, it's hard to really pick one. One of my favorites continues to be, and I was introduced to it when I was younger. As a kid, my father was a travel representative clothing companies, Weidman's in Meridian.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And always used to love to eat the crackers and the peanut butter, and then the black bottom pies to absolutely die for. You got to have that at Weidman's. And something you don't hear a lot about that I enjoy whenever we host a show for the Neshoba County Fair is Philip M's.
Oh, yeah.
It's really a good place to eat.
Philip
So those two. Mary Mahoney's on the coast is still a favorite as well. Try to get there as much as I can whenever we're down. The Speaker of the House, Jason White, is having his 3rd annual, I think, event this Sunday and Monday. It's kind of a golf event. He invites members of the House and others that are involved in the political world headed down there. This will be my 3rd time to attend. One of those nights we are going to Mary Mahoney, so that's always a favorite. My wife being from Biloxi as well, I grew up on that. So
that's one of those. Anytime I'm on the coast, probably gonna if I'm only gonna be there one night, might have to do something different.
Yeah,
but a couple of nights probably gonna hit Mary Mahoney.
Great place, yeah. All the casinos have great restaurants as well, so always enjoy those.
I don't do as well when I go in those places.
We have to
it's not designed that way.
It ended up coming out worse. Yeah.
Hey, those are great places, and
Absolutely.
I think maybe one new one at least that we can add to the list from the guests. So MDOT Public Affairs, we love music. We go see concerts together, and it's a big thing. So I know you're also a music fan just from following you on X and social media. Is there a concert that you've been to recently or even in the past that really sticks out to you, Gerard?
Yeah, so one that I like to talk about on the show is not far from here at the Coliseum. I saw Grand Funk Railroad.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And I think it was 1971, if I'm not mistaken. I have looked it up before, like their tour from those years.
Sure.
And I was a big Grand Funk Railroad fan back then. It was them and Three Dog Night were kind of the two big bands of the era. And I'm an old frustrated amateur drummer, and I kind of modeled and emulated Don Brewer, the famous drummer for Grand Funk Railroad, who, by the way, is the vocalist on We're an American Band. A lot of people don't realize that. It's one of the few songs he was the lead vocalist on. But I saw them at the Coliseum. I'll never forget that concert. But I'm a big Journey fan. So that's why if you listen to my show, you'll hear Journey tunes that introduce the 3 hours of the show. Separate Ways launches the show, a big Journey tune. That was, by the way, the music video was filmed, many people don't know this, on the wharf in New Orleans.
Oh,
okay.
Yeah, it sure was.
Okay.
And the young lady that's featured in the video is a New Orleanian. I don't know how they found her, the casting, but there's like stories about her you can go look up as well.
That's a pretty good fun fact.
It's pretty
right
neat,
there,
yeah. So I've seen them play 5 times. Unfortunately, I could not afford to go see them play when Steve Perry was the front man in the 80s, but I love the music since then, still do. I went to see them, was it last year when they kicked off their tour at the Coliseum on the coast. and
Nice.
we got to see him. I was disappointed we were in row 2. I saw him in New Orleans at Smoothie King 2 years prior to that, and we happened to luck up and get row 1 right in the center, and got to interact with the band members as you kind of can when you're that close,
Sure.
even with security there. And guitarist Neil Sean actually handed me his pick, and
That's
it says
awesome. Oh, there
NS
you
was
go.
here. So I have that.
Frame that one.
I actually had a listener come see me a couple of years ago at a remote, and I noticed him out of the corner of my eye kind of hanging out. We were outside. It was in West Point, and I'm thinking, and I saw him holding what looked like a book, and I just felt like it was a little odd. And finally, during a break, he came over, and it was like a journey book, kind of a history of the band, that he presented to me.
Oh,
He
that's
knew
pretty
I was doing
cool.
it while I was doing the show, and,
Wow.
and I have featured it. It's prominently featured in my what I call my study. So it's pretty neat though.
That is pretty neat.
I just bought a drum kit, a DW drum kit. It's really not too much in the public square at this point, but Mississippi House is putting together a band that they have asked me to be part of as a drummer, because I don't think there's a drummer in the house. So I haven't played drums in 40 years, but hopefully it's like riding a bike, and I can remember that stuff. And I've been learning the songs they sent me that apparently they intend to play. So we'll see what happens on all that.
For all your latest and greatest breaking updates and information on the house band, join us.
That's
right
right.
there.
We have our first practice next Tuesday, so I don't think they're going to say much
awesome.
about it until we actually can make sounds that don't hurt your ears, So that should be fun.
Do the other members actually know how to play an instrument?
Yeah,
Okay, all
they
right,
are.
well, good.
They do.
We're good then.
And I don't want to say I don't know how to play
Sure,
drums. I played
sure.
drums for many years and played in bands back when I
Right,
was in
right,
high
right.
school and college. But the genre of music is a little different, than I played back then. But it's still fairly similar. It doesn't change all that much. And a lot of these are old tunes. They're kind of rock, country rock,
Okay.
and country.
And
So-
well, we won't release a tour schedule yet, but we'll be on the lookout for that. Certainly won't make it out. That'd be a lot of fun, though.
Should be
I
a
think
lot of
that'd be
fun. I think it's a good idea.
Absolutely.
Definitely. I was going to say, whenever there's public appearances, me, Will, and Drew will show up.
That
and
sounds
right.
great.
We'll,
Have
if
it
you'll,
live
somebody will
streamed.
give us the pick there for
That's
sure.
right. We're gonna be standing down there
Yeah.
trying to get the pick.
Yeah, these guys are all bona fide musicians that all played as I did. They're somewhat younger than me, so it hasn't been as long, but and I think they're still somewhat active. But we got people that can play and can sing, and I said, look, you guys are going to have to cover for a bad drummer, so you can do that with a guitar and a bass and keyboards.
That's right. That'd be very cool, though. That was very neat.
Absolutely. Gerard, Renaissance man, really. This was a fascinating interview. Thank you so much I know you're a busy guy. Thank you so much for making time and coming and speaking with us.
Yeah.
Being
Paul,
a friend
well,
of MDOT.
Appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me
Absolutely.
today. I really enjoyed it, and it's a lot of stuff to talk about. A lot of things have happened in my life. I'm very proud to make my home here in Mississippi. I came back to join with your uncle to start this company. Kind of drug him into it a little begrudgingly, but no regrets whatsoever.
That's awesome.
Awesome.
Thank you, Gerard, and we'll go ahead and wrap things up. We want to thank our listeners, our viewers, for tuning into the Extra Mile podcast. You can watch and listen to episodes by visiting gomdot.com/The Extra Mile. Follow us on social media at Mississippi DOT is the handle. We want to thank our producer, editor, Drew Hall, for holding things down behind the scenes. And remember to drive smart out there on Mississippi highways.